just similar enough webinar where we're going to talk about why subtle differences matter in the 2024 SECCR ELA standards. We're going to explore the nuances of the standards and think about why it's critically important to recognize and understand those differences in expectations for each grade level, but also the differences between 2015 and 2024 when there are some similarities. So, starting with some housekeeping introductions. If I have not met you, my name is Brenna McCormick, and I work in the Office of Assessment and Standards, supporting secondary ELA standards. I have two of my colleagues here with me today. I have Mandy Hawker, who is our elementary support person, and then Casey Prince Harvey, who really supports all content areas, but her area of expertise is ELA, so we like to claim her on our team as well. So we thank them for being here. They're going to help run the chat, answer questions, anything that you might need. We do have a landing page today, and the landing page will serve as your place for hyperlinks. We're going to access a couple of things. At one point, you'll need to look at some definitions, and those are on the landing page for you. So you want to go ahead and open that up. I've also put the attendance form in the chat. So if you will please take a moment to complete your attendance, let us know that you're here, because that is one of the requirements for receiving recertification credit for being here today. So we are happy to provide 1 hour of recertification credit for each hour of webinar participation. There are 3 requirements for receiving that credit. You need to be live and an active participant. So check mark, you're all here with us this morning. You must remain in attendance for the duration of the webinar, and then you must complete the attendance form and our feedback forms. So I will give you just a minute more to make sure you have completed the attendance and opened up your landing page. All right. So our purpose today is to equip educators to recognize subtle differences in the new standards and use them to guide planning and instruction for improved teaching and learning outcomes. Ultimately, that's our goal for everything, right? Is to improve our teaching and learning outcomes. So we hope that with our work today, we can do just that. All right, I'm going to show you some images, and I just want you to consider them for a moment. I see a couple smiles. So I found all of these images and tons more with just a 30-second Google search. And we all know that there are always differing circumstances. There's always the student who, no, we taught that, you just weren't paying attention, right? But I also believe that there has to be a bit of truth in this for so many of these to exist. What do you think that the students who created these memes, these images, these graphics experienced? Why might they feel this way? And you can answer in the chat. You can unmute yourself however you'd like to let me know what you're thinking.
I know in terms of speaking to my math colleagues where I used to teach, she would explain that she taught the concepts, but then it was the kids' job to apply them. And it's really hard to apply things when you've never been taught how to apply them.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I think that is exactly what we're seeing in the chat as well, that perhaps the test is more application of what the knowledge was learned. But students really do need to be explicitly taught how to apply concepts and skills, right? Alexis said that lack of alignment between what's taught and what's assessed. And we're going to talk about that a good bit today. They felt unheard. Yeah. Yes, Mandy, me too. Makes me think of graduate school probability and statistics. I'll never forget Georgie Baker. That was my probability and statistics professor in college, and it was wild. It was wild times. They were lost. Yep, absolutely. Lack of scaffolding. There's a disconnect. What is between what is being taught, what's explicitly taught, and your standards and instruction and assessment don't align. I love it. So now that you're thinking through that lens, I want you to consider this scenario. You've been driving on a stretch of road for about 60 miles and you haven't seen a single speed limit sign. You set your cruise control to 70, thinking that's a reasonable speed for the current conditions. But shortly after, you're pulled over and given a speeding ticket because apparently the speed limit is 50. How do you feel? Uninformed? Blindsided? Frustrated? Angry? Yes. Shocked? Right? Tricked? Unfair? Cheated? Oh, yeah, it's exactly how I would feel. Um, for sure. Now I want you to imagine how our students feel when they're held accountable to an expectation of which they are not aware. The same thing that we would feel as the driver of that car and getting the recipient of that speeding ticket is often how our students feel when they get to an assessment, be it a formative classroom assessment or a state summative assessment, and they feel like they're being held to an expectation that they did not meet in the classroom, right? Um, and that can be really, really hard for them. And this is why those subtle differences matter. When new academic standards are adopted in education, it's crucial for teachers to understand how these standards differ from the old ones, even when the instances that the differences are subtle. So if you're a teacher and you're like, you know what, this particular indicator is very similar to the old indicator, I'm just going to carry on with the lesson I had last year. We are then setting our students up for that speeding ticket situation where they're going to feel blindsided by an assessment that they are not prepared for. And so that's what we want to make sure we are trying to avoid. Oh, yeah, Emily, that's great. Absolutely. Rubrics, best way to really make those expectations visible. Okay, so now we got our thinking started. Let's look at the agenda. So we're going to look through two lenses today. The first lens are going to be the differences between 2015 and 2024. And then the second lens is going to be the vertical articulation document. So if you just look at 2024, what's the difference between second grade and third grade? What's the difference between E1 and E2? You're going to have some time to really explore and engage with each other, and then we'll close up for the day. So starting with the shift from 2015 to 2024. One huge reason that the subtle differences really matter is that alignment of instruction. And I was already seeing this in the chat, that you've got your grade level indicators, that moves to instruction, and that moves to assessment. All three of those things have to be aligned. And when I mention assessment here, yes, state summative assessments, but also your classroom assessments, your formative assessments, your summative assessments in your classroom. knowing the differences between the new and old standards ensures that you can align those instructional strategies, the materials, with those current expectations. Those subtle changes in standards can reflect shifts in focus, depth, complexity that you really need to address. Uh, for example, a minor change from maybe in kindergarten, identify, to first grade, identify and explain, requires teachers to adjust instructions so that students move past that identification stage and really articulate their understanding. So let's look at some examples. On the left, you'll see seventh grade 2015 standards. And on the right, you're going to see the roughly the equivalent of the seventh grade 2024. So I'm going to give you a moment to read these and maybe notice some differences. Catherine. So, what are the implications if I chose to say, you know what, this is close enough? So, I'm just going to stick with what I did with the 2015. Yeah, there would not be full mastery of that 2024 indicator because there's new terminology, there's ways of thinking. If you notice, 2015 includes evaluate. That is not the skill that we are expecting in 2024. They're not going to be prepared for eighth grade and beyond. They're going to be missing a rung in the ladder. Absolutely. It says also in 2024, we're tracing the development of the argument, not just the argument itself. Absolutely. Okay. What about this one? This is fourth grade. Inquiry is on the left from 2015, and on the right is our fourth grade research 1.1. More precise and specific. Yes. I even look at the 2015 indicator and feel like that's a little bit higher in the expectation than the 2024. 2024 feels a little bit more developmentally appropriate. Um, and it expects them to do something very different than 2015. Yep, I'm reading some of these. Absolutely, Mary, that you're looking at a process. Very good. They're actually doing research in the new standards other than just planning for it. I love that point. So if our students aren't receiving this new indicator language instruction, they will not be prepared to conduct that research on their own. Okay, let's look at a high school example. So on the left, you have writing 1.1, 2.1, and 3.1, just sections of that. And on the right, you have English 2, Communications 5.1. feedback. So this one is relatively similar, except it is missing that aspect of feedback from peers and adults. Now, students won't likely be asking for and considering feedback on a summative classroom assessment or a state assessment, right? But why is this skill important for college, career, and military readiness? Why can we not just skip that feedback piece because, oh, students won't be assessed on that? Mm, yep. Teaches students to evaluate their own writing, shows that nothing's ever complete. We keep working. Students have to know how to apply that. I can't think of a single career or college experience where students aren't going to have to give and receive feedback at some point. And Jessica, that's true too, that their writing tests aren't necessarily timed. So they have that ability to draft, to revise. Michelle, I agree 100%. She says students need to be able to internalize that feedback to help them assess their own work. I 100% believe that if you're consistently giving feedback throughout the school year, by the time you get to that state summative assessment, they're having those conversations in their head with themselves. Okay, so that's thinking through that lens of the alignment of our instruction, of making sure that the skills that we teach align with the new standards, because if we just relied on the 2015 standards, we're not hitting that expectation, that mark. Now let's shift the thinking for just a moment and think about our classroom assessments, because I think naturally teachers are going to be more apt to adjust their planning, their plans, than they are their assessments. Like you might just say, oh, you know what, I'll pull this same theme test out, or I'm just going to use the assessment that comes with my curriculum because surely it's close enough. But we really need to be very aware and very intentional that our classroom assessments align directly to our instruction, which aligns directly to our indicators, grade level indicators. Because if not, we're setting them up for that speeding ticket scenario. So take a moment and look at this seventh grade standard. We've got RL 5.1 and 6.1 from 2015, and then AOR 2.1 from 2024. I'm going to give you an assessment question, and I want you to tell me, does it align with 2024? If it does, why? If not, what's missing? Absolutely. We're missing the comparison of two or more themes. This is a really close question. This would be an easy one to say, oh, yep, check mark. Let's just keep that question. But if you look in 2015, determine one or more, whereas 2024 explicitly says compare to, right? And honestly, determining and comparison are also two different things. So while this question seems like a pretty rigorous question, it does not align with the 2024 indicator language and would not set students up for success if they saw a similar question on a summative assessment. Absolutely, Kate. It could be a good scaffold in that process toward mastery. Maybe this is the question you use with your tier two small group and move them toward independence and being able to compare two or more. What happens if we continue to use this question only? because it's close enough. They're not going to be, we can't, we'll miss that step in vertical progression, which students will not be able to meet the expectation. Now, let's say you think about it from the instruction point, like we were just talking about a second ago. What if you only instructed using one text, and then the question you gave them said, compare two or more? You're assessing the correct expectation, but have you taught the correct expectation? All right. All right, let's look at one more. All right, so this is first grade. Take a moment, look at your 2015 versus your 2024. And here's your assessment question. Yep, this is the identification is met, but the explanation is not, right? So identify and explain the purpose. Yep. And just so you know, so this is first grade. In 2024, similes are introduced in the second grade. So not only are you expecting less as far as explain goes, you're asking them about a concept that they have not been taught yet. So that again, not setting students up for success. I think figurative language is one of those things that starting in probably kindergarten, first grade, we throw all these terms at students and say, memorize, memorize, memorize all of them. And one thing that I love about our new indicators is the way that vertical progression is set up is that they're introduced to just a couple very specific pieces of figurative language every year until they've got them all. And it just feels a lot more manageable for our students. All right, last one is a high school. We've got AOR 2.2. And here's your assessment question. Yeah. So asking for that objective summary does not meet the expectation of AOR 2.2, where we're asking students to analyze, identify the central idea over the course of a text. Catherine, great question. So AOR is one of our four strands. It's applications of reading. So if you compared that to our 2015 standards, it would be like if you put the reading literary text and the reading informational text together into one. Yep, missing the mark. So we've talked about two reasons those subtle differences matter from 2015 to 2024, that alignment of instruction and then the idea of revising our current classroom assessments because that's sometimes seems to be something we forget or kind of push to the side. But now let's think about this. Did you know there's more than 70 school districts in our state, right? Almost 80. Based on the 135-day count for 23-24, There were 790,264 students enrolled in K-12. So 790,264 students enrolled in public school. It's like 800,000 kids. There is no doubt that students within our state, with 800,000 students and 80 districts, move schools during the school year. No doubt. So why does the consistency in the expectations and the language that we use matter for these students, for these 800,000 students in our state? Yeah. If I'm in Aiken and I move to Spartanburg, and my Aiken teacher was teaching 2024 standards, and then my Spartanburg teacher is teaching 2015 standards, I'm going to be confused. I'm going to not know what is expected of me. Yes, absolutely. Continuity of learning, consistency, transition for students is easy. We're ensuring that continued growth across our state. Mm, Paula, that's a great personal example, that transfer of learning when you move districts. So I want you to look at some definitions. And we're talking about ensuring that consistency and equity across our state. So on the middle column, you'll see 2015 glossary definitions. On the right-hand side, you're going to see the 2024 glossary definitions for 4 terms: author's perspective, author's purpose, and point of view. What do you notice about the definitions? Sometimes there's no definition at all in the 2015. And if there's no definition provided, what does that leave teachers to do? Interpret, Google it, make it up, look it up. hmm There's clarification in that difference between perspective and point of view in 2024. Mm, absolutely. Um, Point of view is much more specific. You can see that in our standards for point of view in 2014, only first person and third person are directly mentioned. When all teachers are aware of and understand the new standards, they can provide a consistent educational experience across different classrooms, different schools, different districts. And that consistency helps ensure that all students have equitable access to the same high quality education, regardless of their teacher, school, or district. So these subtle differences, even like I was recently with a district and one of the teachers said, "Oh, I've seen the glossary. I have it printed here." And it was the 2015 glossary. And I said, "Yep, that is the old glossary. There's a new one." But even the differences in the way that we define terms can influence how we place emphasis on particular skills, content, and how we impact students' learning experiences. Now, in your landing page, on your landing page, your note catcher, I've included the definitions that you see on the screen right now. I want you to look at those and then look at grade 3, AOR 3.1, and RL 11.2, and think back to the definitions or take a look at the definitions on your landing page. And what would the implications be if you taught students using the definitions from 2015? So let's look at RL 11.2. Compare and contrast the reader's point of view to that of the narrator or a character. 9 times out of 10, a student's going to look at that and think perspective over point of view. Like, what's my perspective, right? It's going to be used interchangeably. And if we're looking at the definitions from 2015, we're not going to get a whole lot of help with that. If you look at the 2024 definitions, you'll see that perspective, point of view are very clearly delineated and defined. And you can teach students the exact definitions from the glossary so that when they see that language in our indicators, on assessments, in instruction, they have the same understanding. Kate, yes, point of view and perspective are not interchangeable. All right, let me give you another set. We've got key details, supporting details, literary device, and literary elements. What are we noticing between these definitions? Yes, Emily. So you've got examples in 2024. There's precision, specific key terms are highlighted. Okay, so these definitions are also on your landing page. Let's look at this question or this indicator. This is RL 8.1 for English 2 and AOR 1.1 for English 2. What if I taught using the 2015 indicators or term definitions? Yes, Eleanor. Let's say that I'm attempting to teach 2024 AOR 1.1 and I get to that word key elements. I go back to the glossary, but I pick up the wrong one and I'm looking at 2015. Key elements is not defined. Key details is, and it says extremely or crucially important details. Okay, so there's no specificity in that. So what is the teacher left to do? Make up their own, right? I get to decide what is extremely or crucially important. And what I think is extremely and crucially important may not be the same thing as the teacher next door or the teacher in a district over. So using that glossary is absolutely, Mandy, like Mandy said, giving that advantage to students. So if you're not familiar with that 2024 glossary language, you may not be able to teach to the intent of an indicator. So that's going to be a really important tool for you. So the three things that we talked about when we're looking at 2015 to 2024: aligning our instruction, revising our classroom assessments, and ensuring consistency and equity by utilizing resources such as that glossary. So take a moment in the chat and complete these sentence starters. A light bulb moment I had. This made me think about, I will use this knowledge too. Mm, love that. Use the knowledge to collaborate with the team to assess our formal and informal assessments, review lesson plans, and I lost it. Assessments to assure they're in alignment. A light bulb moment was the importance of the glossary. Yeah, truly understanding the standards just made me think of previous lessons. I will modify. We need to weed through old instruction, get rid of activities that do not align, or just revise them, right? Because I bet a lot of it's close, close enough, and we can revise them. All right. So, thinking about your newly adopted textbooks, those high quality instructional materials, we know that there will never be a 100% aligned curriculum unless we wrote it ourselves. So there's always going to be places where we may need to supplement, revise, edit when we're looking at our high quality instructional materials. Absolutely. That glossary is going to be helpful. Mm, love that, Mary. A light bulb moment I had was when we did the scenario about the speed limit. Truly clicks, right? And why it's important to pay attention. Kind of gets you right in the gut, right? Of like, ooh, I'm setting my students up for a speeding ticket. And there are four strands, Catherine. You have your foundations of literacy, applications of reading, research, and written and oral communications. Casey or Mandy, will you pop one of our overview webinars in there in case somebody wants to go back and look at some of those foundational things about the standards? Excellent, guys. Thank you. Yes, consistent for our transient students because we have a lot. Catherine, foundations of literacy is mostly going to be your K through 5. All right, so let's now look through that second lens. So when we're looking at subtle differences between grade levels within the 2024. So we've moved on from the 2015, we're looking just at the 2024 now. So I'm going to have you watch this short video. Let me make sure I turned my sound on. Forgot to do that. And I want you to think about how this matches the development of standards as you're watching. See if you can hear it. It's just background music, so it's not the end of the world. Okay, so tell me what similarities you see between the construction of a building and the construction of academic standards and indicators. Building on each level, the foundation is essential. Scaffolding, one floor at a time. Small changes can make big improvements. I love that. Starts with a foundation, scaffolds. Yep. Prior not, we're building upon levels. Absolutely. So, what I was noticing, or what my team noticed, was exactly what you're noticing. That once we miss a level, it's hard to go back. It's not like you can build the third floor if you didn't build the first or second, right? And once the second floor is finished and you build the third floor on top of it, it's going to be hard to edit the second floor. Yes, Paula, there is a blueprint. We've planned, Angie. Both start with a strong foundation. Each level that is added is connected to the previous level and the level to come. No level is independent. Each level is shored up with various systems of support to ensure there's no breakdown in either the foundation or the level. And construction takes planning, time, and constant monitoring during that building process. So when our committee was working to review and revise the standards to create the 2024 standards, there were a couple of things that they really paid specific attention to. Um, they wanted the 2024 version of standards to be rigorous, organized, measurable, manageable. They wanted to include a really a specific skills progression, and then for them to be comprehensive. And I know Casey always says her favorite part is that manageability. And we were looking with the district just yesterday about how the reduction in those indicators is so significant um, for teachers to really be able to tackle these within a school year. And so these subtle differences in language between grade level indicators are crucial because they do reflect that developmental progression of student skills. Um, the nuances there ensure that each grade level builds upon the previous one in a logical and coherent manner. This fosters that gradual increase in complexity and depth of knowledge, and it allows for an organized, rigorous, measurable, and comprehensive set of standards. So, one thing before we really take a look at some of these vertical articulations, we always like to remind and put just a foundation down about the difference between standards and indicators. If you have been in probably any number of webinars or PD with us, you've seen this Venn diagram. But does anybody want to take a guess at what is the difference between standards and indicators? Thank you, Emily. Yeah, so your standards are that broad, overarching indicators of the specific and targeted. It's what we're actually teaching. Yes. So your standards represent what students should know and be able to do by the end of their academic career. And they're the same kindergarten through English 4. So if you looked at a kindergarten standard and then looked at that same standard for English 4, they are the exact same verbatim. And that doesn't mean that we're asking kindergartners to do that skill. It's just the destination. By the end of K-12, here's where we expect students to get to. This is what our kindergarten teachers need to know, that eventually their little rung in the ladder will build and build and build until students get to that standard expectation. The indicators are what students are expected to learn by the end of the academic year. These are the measurable, progressive, developmentally appropriate expectations for every grade level. And together they work to make the foundation of instructional planning. Oftentimes your administrators may ask you, hey, put your standard on the board, right? Like, We need to see the standard you're teaching. And now you can tell them, I don't teach standards, I teach indicators, right? Because in South Carolina for ELA, we teach grade level indicators. Standards are too broad. Um, for our earlier grades, especially, that's too far in the distance. That's not developmentally appropriate for that particular rung in the ladder. We need to focus on those grade level indicators. So let's look at some. This is AOR 2. That's the standard in purple or right up here at the top underneath the green band. It's evaluate and critique the development of themes and central ideas within and across text. So let's look at a couple of indicators. Here's your first grade indicator, your seventh grade indicator, and your English 4 indicator. Compare that to the standard itself. If I'm a first grade teacher and I only rely on the standard language, AOR 2, what are my first graders going to be missing? Lesson. So these specific vocabulary, that building block language, retelling. What if I'm a seventh grade student and my teacher just relies on the standard language? What am I going to miss? Compare. And then if you look at the English 4, you might naturally think, oh, well, it's going to be the same as the standard, but it's different because this is a 2.1 indicator and there's a 2.2 as well. And those two, 2.1, 2.2 work together to make the overall AOR 2 standard. So if I only looked at the standard, what specificity am I missing as an English 4 student? Universal, that language, and then from different time periods, places, and cultures. So it's very important that teachers are honing in on those grade level indicators to ensure that students get each piece. Do you think if the first grade teacher doesn't teach that indicator, the second grade teacher's got some catching up to do? And that puts the second grade teacher behind, which means the third grade teacher will be behind, the fourth grade teacher will be behind, so on and so forth. All right, let's look at this example. This is 2.2. We're looking at kindergarten, sixth grade, and English 2. If I am a kindergarten teacher and I'm only relying on the standard language, what are my students missing from the indicator? Retelling, supporting details. What about sixth grade? What specific grade level skills will students miss if those teachers only look at standard language? The analysis piece, how can we evaluate and critique if we've never analyzed, right? Same thing goes for that English too. And if you look at English too, we're looking specifically at historical speeches or essays, right? All right. So one thing about the vertical articulation document, if you look at them, you'll notice that there's some bolded words. Those bold words indicate that information is being introduced at that grade level. So for example, in second grade, explicit theme is the first time students see that, right? So that second grade teacher's solely responsible for introducing that language. Um, Fourth grade, implied theme, English 1, universal theme. Those are the first time those aspects have been introduced. What differences do you notice between grade 3 and grade 4 that I have over on the side? Implied theme is added. Hmm. All right, now look at the fifth grade indicator. What happens in fifth grade if the fourth grade teacher relied on the third grade indicator? They're going to wonder what an implied theme is because the fourth grade teacher was responsible for introducing that. Students have never got an introduction to that before, and now your fifth grade teacher is having to go backwards and reteach that, right? We know that in the real world, there will still, even if the fourth grade teacher teaches this with fidelity, the best it can be, there's going to be fifth grade students who are like, I don't know what an implied theme is. My teacher never taught me that, right? We know that. But that's the time that that fifth grade teacher pulls tier 2 students aside in small group instruction. Our teachers are relying on the previous grades teachers to teach those grade level indicators so that they can be effective in their tier 1 instruction. They can move forward with the grade level expectation and teach that to all students in the classroom because that's what we're duty bound to do, is to teach the grade level indicators. Bonus question. Take a look at the correlation to fourth grade. What happens if the fourth grade teacher used the 2015 standards instead? They may or may not know explicit or implied based on how that fourth grade teacher interpreted the 2015 indicator, right? Also, we have summarizing versus explaining. Yes, Jessica, very vague idea of theme because there's no specific terminology there. And then as students continue to move up in the ladder, again, they may or may not know the difference between explicit or implied or ever have heard that language at all. Look at this one. What difference do you notice between sixth and seventh? Analyze versus explain. And you may notice that analysis in sixth grade seems like a more complex skill than explaining in seventh grade. But we also know that we have to look past the verb when we're considering rigor expectations. And so the skills there are what has changed the content text structure versus author's purpose. Now, what happens in 8th grade if your 7th grade teacher teaches the 6th grade indicator? What are we missing? Author's purpose, right? So our students have missed a crucial introduction of a skill. And then again, what if that 7th grade teacher taught the 2015 indicator instead? There's no purpose. The 2015 indicator says author's ideas or claim. Absolutely. All right, last one. Let's look at a high school example. We're looking at English 2 to English 3. What happens in English 4 if the English 3 teacher teaches the English 2 indicator? We would go straight from analyze to evaluate and critique, right? Which is a huge difference. Evaluation, we're judging, we're giving our opinion. Critique is we're also giving suggestions on how to make it better. So students have missed that idea of evaluating. And what happens if your English 3 teacher just says, you know what, I'm using the 2015 standards. This wasn't an indicator in 2015. So students are missing a huge chunk, right? Huge chunk. And so Casey just put the glossary in the chat for us, and we're actually going to switch over to thinking about using the glossary to align those expectations. So, like I just mentioned, the verbs in an indicator are not the sole contributor to rigor and complexity, right? Just because it's analysis or evaluation or critique, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that plays into the rigor of that question. It's very important to notice what's after the verb. But for this discussion, we're going to look at verbs because it is important to notice that very first grade level expectation. So, what difference do you notice between the definitions of these 3 verbs? I like that, Catherine. We're exploring, we're giving a really critical eye and analysis, and then we're forming an opinions, and then we're proposing feedback. Oh, I like that, Amy. There's progressive. Yep. Each step is a higher and deeper level of thinking. They build on one another. Just going back to that building analogy, you've got to be able to analyze, to evaluate. You've got to be able to evaluate, to critique. Ooh, I love that, Emily. Analyze is getting into an author's brain, evaluate is sharing your own brain, and critique is creating an opinion about both. I like it. So let's revisit AOR 10.1. Right, Catherine? Stealing it. Um, if you look at English 4 and English 3, 10.1. What skills would our English 4 students miss out on if the teachers stopped at English 3? Giving their feedback, their critique piece. Now, sometimes I've heard on rare occasion, well, English 4, I mean, like, they're not assessed, they're going to college, they're seniors, they're kind of over it, doesn't really matter. What, like, college career, life, military readiness skill are they missing out on with that critique piece if they're not practicing how to provide feedback based on their own opinions? It matters to those seniors who are going out into the workforce or going into college. We don't want to skip that. It's critical thinking, absolutely. All right. Yes. So I want you to think for a second about the vertical articulation, the process that we've been going through, looking at what happens if a teacher skips a level or teaches only the level prior instead of the level they're on. And I want you to look through a couple of different lenses or perspectives. How does that impact scaffolding and instructional planning? How does that impact the developmental appropriateness and the expectations of rigor and complexity for students, assessment and accountability, and that tailored instruction and tier two support? So, what I want you to do is to pick one of these four. Think about the vertical articulation and teaching with fidelity to your grade level indicator. How would it impact one of these four areas if you did not do that? And you can unmute or put your answer in the chat.
For the assessment and accountability, if you teach at the previous standards from 2015, then you're not actually going to be assessing the students on what they are supposed to have learned. And on the same, I guess, it's in the same vein for instruction, scaffolding and instructional planning, right? If your previous grade level, or maybe even you, if you choose not to scaffold and change your instructional planning to make sure that it aligns with the new standards, then you're not holding the students accountable to the new standards either. And you're making a more difficult job for the person after you.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm, yep, creating gaps. You're not providing those foundational skills. Yep. Assessments will not be a true reflection of students' grade level knowledge because we haven't taught them the grade level expectation. And if you were looking at the vertical articulation for some of these, they are very similar. They are very close. There are just very subtle nuances. And it is important to hone in on those because you will miss that, as Michelle said, that changing complexity of each grade level indicator. Okay, that was a lot of talking at you. So let's wrap up so that you can have some time to do a little bit of exploration and talking to each other. Jessica, true. Some are not subtle because they didn't even exist before, right? All right, so consider this. What's on your plaque? What have you learned? What can you say? Yep, I walked away learning this one thing so far today. What's still on your plate? So now that we've talked about that vertical alignment, what next steps do you have? And what's your priority of those next steps? What's the first thing you're going to do? Yep, that glossary. Mm, love that, Kate. Yes, Mary, pay close attention to the indicators and not just the standards. Priorities share with my team. Notice the differences. Yep, I love that, Emily. Applying your learning to your new high quality instructional materials. Mm. Ooh, making a standards binder. Love it. Check the curriculum to the indicators, updating vocabulary. Yeah. Revamping assessments. Yay, Jennifer. Mm, excellent. Love this. All right. Our last section here is a chance to explore and engage. So step one is to explore. And if you look at your landing page, next to number 3, there's some links for you to start with. I've linked the crosswalk, the vertical articulation, and some additional resources that include the top 10 infographics. If you were not with us on that webinar series, we created some top 10 lists for every grade band that were, hey, if you're feeling overwhelmed, here's 10 things that you can start with that we think are crucially important for your grade band. Okay. I've also linked the glossary. And then 2 things that aren't linked, but that I encourage you to pull out if you have them nearby. Maybe personal instructional units, your lesson plans, your classroom assessments. And then if you have access to them, your high quality instructional materials, so your curriculum, whatever textbook was adopted. And I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to do some independent, just looking through these things, noticing the differences, just maybe making a plan for how you're going to attack some of this work. And then we're going to go into breakout rooms to talk about maybe what you've uncovered, what you're thinking, what your next steps are. And again, that's okay, Catherine. If you don't have your textbooks yet, that's a-okay. You can just look through any of those other resources that are linked. I'll be quiet, stop talking, and I'll give us till about 11:25. Casey, can you redrop the landing page, please? Thank you. Okay, thank you, Cassandra. Eleanor, Casey's going to drop the landing page, and those links are there next to the number 3.
And if it's helpful, it's also pinned at the top of the chat. So you should see a pinned comment at the top that has the links for the attendance and the landing page.
I literally didn't even know you could do that. All right, in just a moment, we're going to move you into breakout rooms for you to have a little bit of discussion about what you're thinking. On your landing page, number 4, I do have a couple of discussion questions. You don't have to use these, but if you need a place to get started, you can think about what you noticed, what you learned, how are these learning's gonna impact your instructional practices, what resources you found helpful, how are you going to share this information with your colleagues, and in general, why do these subtle differences matter? So Mandy's gonna pop us over to breakout rooms for maybe 12 or so minutes. We'll be coming in and out and monitoring and answering questions if you have them. So welcome back, welcome back. I think we got everyone. Um, those are great conversations. I really enjoyed popping in and listening. All the rooms were just actively engaged. It's wonderful. So what I would like for you to do now, let me reshare my screen, is in the chat or unmute and tell me the most important thing. So from those discussions, from the conversations that you had or the independent work that you did, what's the most important thing you're walking away with today?
I would say knowing what I need to pre-assess, like knowing what those bolded words are bolded for, knowing
Mm,
that they need to know that before starting the year. I think that'll be a good foundation to have.
I love that, Mary. Found out Mary's a first year teacher. So welcome. We're excited to have her in high school.
For me, I think it's really taken note of the changes because I'm at a K2 school, so the foundational piece is really new for us.
Mm,
Um, new standards, the change, they're a lot more specific. So I think we're really going to dig into that as a school. That crosswalk, I think, will be helpful for us. And
yeah.
good luck, Mary. I'm glad I got to meet you in our chat.
Oh, thank you. You too.
I love that. Let's see. So clarity, avoiding confusion. Love that. Indicators are specific. Glossary is going to be great. Know your indicators, notice bolded words. Make sure your assessment and classroom practice align. Very good. Most important thing is knowing how to access the resources. Yes, absolutely. Glossary all day, every day. I love it. Intentional planning. My favorite word is intentional. We have to do things on purpose. We do. Mm. It's a great point, Jessica, that their high quality instructional materials are very aligned with the lessons, but not so much with assessment. So that's a place they'll have to dig in. I love that.
I think one of my takeaways kind of goes with that too. Just I think my ELA team at my school is very good at being close enough and saying close enough is good enough, and that is not the case.
Mm. We love that language and empower you all to to go forth and share, right? Love that. Some people were talking about getting all the resources in one place. If you have not seen our standards app, that's a great place to go. That's the link for the desktop version, but we also have a phone version. So let me get you the QR code for that. All of the resources, including webinars, the um, calendar of events for when we're doing any kind of PD, communication, bulletins, emails that are sent out. It's all right there for you. Excellent. All right, guys, let's move into our clarity and closure and wrap this thing up. So let's go back to the speeding ticket scenario. Students cannot demonstrate expectations they do not understand or have not received. What steps can we take to ensure students understand grade level appropriate expectations? How can we make these things visible for students? Reassessment. I love that. Knowing the differences ourselves. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you guys know that we love some alliteration. So I'm going to use 3 A's here. Number one, acquire a deep understanding, and that's on us, right? Participate in professional development sessions just like you are today that are focused on those new standards. Collaborate with your colleagues just like you did today, talking with people all across the state to unpack, discuss these grade level expectations and their implications for classroom instruction. Familiarize yourself with that glossary. Um, this will help ensure that you use the correct language and concepts when teaching and assessing students. Number two, align instruction and formative assessments. So your formative and summative classroom assessments should be aligned with grade level indicators. This is going to help you prepare students more effectively for the state summative assessment. Map out that curriculum. Look through your high quality instructional materials. Take the lesson set and materials that you've previously used and make sure they're all thoroughly aligned to the indicators. Use that backward design to plan lessons that meet those end goals. And then finally, assure clear, consistent, and visible expectations. I heard the word consistent used a lot. That we want to make sure that no matter where students are in the state, they're getting the same information. So give students rubrics, give them exemplar assignments, examples that illustrate the expected level of rigor and content so that students really do understand what high quality work looks like. And we're setting those clear benchmarks for success. Clearly articulate learning targets, success criteria, post them in the classroom, discuss them with students at the beginning and the end of each lesson. Make sure you're using your grade level indicator language. If you can do those 3 A's, acquire, align, and assure. All right, look back at today's purpose. Our goal was to equip you to recognize subtle differences in the new standards, use them to guide planning and instruction for improved teaching and learning outcomes. So if you could rate yourself on a scale of comfortability based on when you arrived to this webinar, just under 2 hours ago to now, scale of 1 to 5, 5 being I'm super comfortable. Where would you rate yourself now? Where's your growth over this time together? Love it. 4, 4.5, 3.5, 4. Excellent. Love to see growth. From a 1 to a 4. Excellent, Renee. That's huge growth. As always, thank you all for being such active participants. We have had the best time this summer with these webinars and getting to know all of you from across the state and being introduced to new folks. I felt like we've bonded a little summer cohort group. We've had a lot of those repeaters, so we appreciate. That's okay, Mary. We appreciate y'all showing up and showing out when you're in here. If you will, take 1 minute, please, to provide some feedback for me, and then we will listen and linger. Again, I'm Brenna McCormick, and my email's there on the screen. You're always welcome to reach out to any of us on the team. And I will be quiet for a minute so you can complete your feedback form. And then we will listen and linger to answer any questions you may still have. For those of you who haven't started school yet, enjoy your last few days of summer. For those of you that have, we are wishing you all the best.